The moment the glass vase shattered across the polished oak floor, Madison's heart froze, her heel poised mid-step, the tinkling fragments scattering like tiny stars under the dim chandelier light, Lucas Bennett's laughter echoing from across the room, sharp and unrelenting, as he raised his champagne flute with a grin that dared her to respond, the clock above the grand fireplace ticking louder than usual, measuring every second of her hesitation. The gala was in full swing 20 minutes past 8 on a crisp October evening at the Bennett estate, the scent of roasted chestnuts and vanilla candles filling the air, waiters weaving between the guests with trays of sparkling hors d'oeuvres, and Madison's hand instinctively brushed against the silk of her gown, fingertips grazing the hidden pocket where she had tucked the invitation that had lured her into this lion's den, the subtle shimmer of her diamond bracelet catching the soft golden light as she scanned the crowd, eyes landing on Lucas and his arm around his new fiancé, a flash of memory stabbing her vision, dinner tables where Lucas had made jokes at her expense, birthday presents left unopened, whispered promises broken over and over, the echo of a slammed door from years ago reverberating in her chest. She stepped forward, letting her heel click against the marble, each sound a deliberate punctuation, and Lucas's grin faltered for a split second, curiosity flickering in his eyes, a silent question hanging in the air. What is she doing here? Madison's lips curved into a faint, controlled smile, and without a word, she reached for a tray of glasses, tilting one slightly, letting the condensation drip like a timer across the edge, a small, calculated gesture that drew the waiter's attention and inevitably Lucas's, the soft hum of conversation around them muting as the tension between the two thickened. She paused by the grand piano, hand brushing the polished wood, noting the gleam of a golden sheet music stand, a reminder of evenings spent in quieter times when music had been their common language, before the laughter of betrayal had filled the room, Lucas's voice cutting through. I didn't expect to see you here. Casual, almost teasing, yet a hint of unease threading through the words. Madison's eyes flicked to the reflection in the window behind him, catching the faint outline of a sharply dressed man watching, the subtle twitch of his hand signaling an ally ready in the wings, her next step a shift in posture, a tilt of the head that redirected the room's gaze just enough to tilt the power, a server's tray wobbling as she passed, spilling a single olive, drawing a collective gasp and a few heads turning, Madison bending slightly to retrieve it, eyes never leaving Lucas, an unspoken challenge forming in the air, the room holding its breath as she allowed a soft, almost imperceptible sigh, the echo of past dinners, arguments, and unkept promises flashing through her mind in microseconds, the glint of her engagement ring catching the chandelier light as she straightened, Lucas adjusting his cufflinks nervously, a subtle shift, the micro power now in her hands, and as the first notes of the live pianist's aria filled the hall, Madison's gaze swept the crowd, searching, analyzing, calculating her next move, each step, each gesture a silent dialogue, the small brush of fabric against a chair, the deliberate tilt of her head, the soft click of her clutch on the marble floor, all weaving together, building a narrative that left Lucas momentarily unsettled, the first chapter of their confrontation written in gestures and glances, and the room unaware that every tick of the clock was drawing them closer to a revelation that would upend Lucas's carefully curated world. You should not be here, Lucas Bennett said sharply, the sound of his words cutting through the low hum of the gala like a knife as Madison Hart adjusted the strap of her silk gown, stepping closer to the grand staircase where the light from the chandelier fractured against the polished marble, reflecting in shards across the room, a sudden microsecond of brilliance that caught Lucas's eye and made him pause, her heels clicking a measured rhythm that drew attention subtly, a flash of a text message blinking on her phone screen from an unknown number. Look out for him tonight, which she pocketed. Immediately, curiosity and unease sharpening together, she noticed a folded envelope on the velvet armchair where Lucas had been leaning, her name scrawled on the front in his handwriting, the paper heavy and textured, and a brief glance revealed a cryptic phrase, "Not everything is as it seems," making her assumption crystallize that Lucas had set a trap for her presence tonight, perhaps underestimating the control she could assert. Her next step deliberate as she maneuvered past a waiter, carrying a tray of flutes, the subtle clink of glass punctuating each heartbeat. She intercepted a single flute, tilting it gently to sip, a calculated movement that allowed her to observe Lucas without breaking composure, and the faint echo of laughter from a nearby group masked the shift in energy she sensed. Lucas leaned against the banister, eyes narrowing, Noticing the exchange of glances between Madison and a sharply dressed man in the corner, whom Madison had not yet identified, and she caught a flicker of recognition in Lucas's expression, a fleeting crack in his confident mask, the chandelier above them twinkling like a silent witness to the tension building. A server brushed past her, carrying a tray of canapés, and one slipped from the tray, landing near Lucas's feet, his movement to pick it up slightly jerking him off balance. A small but telling loss of control, Madison's gaze tracing his posture, noting the subtle tremor in his jaw. A confirmation to her mind that the stakes were shifting in her favor. As she moved closer to the piano, the soft hum of the strings filled the air, a low note vibrating through the floorboards. Lucas's exclamation. Madison, really, I did not expect, cut off by the sudden drop of a glass from another table, startling a waiter and creating a ripple of attention, a momentary distraction that gave Madison the chance to step into a line of sight where her presence could not be ignored. She paused, hand lightly brushing the polished surface of the piano, the reflection revealing the shadow of the unknown observer at the corner, eyes sharp, possibly a partner in her unspoken plan, and she tilted her head slightly, a gesture that drew Lucas's curiosity, his assumption that he held the upper hand now subtly questioned, as if the room itself conspired to test his composure. Madison felt the weight of the envelope in her clutch, the texture almost grounding, and the faint creak of the staircase under a late-arriving guest reminded her that moments of vulnerability were fleeting, a mental clock ticking faster, forcing an immediate decision: advance to confront Lucas directly in the center or maintain the periphery while gathering more information. The small shuffle of her feet and the glide of the gown against the marble dictating her choice. She chose forward movement, and as she did, a server's tray wobbled, spilling a single olive near Lucas, his reflexive bend drawing attention, eyes flicking to her with a mix of annoyance and unease, the power in the room subtly shifting again, Madison noting the micro details, the tilt of his cuff, the faint stain on his tie, the angle of the chandelier catching her bracelet, each element confirming her assumption that tonight's control was negotiable. Lucas stepped closer, voice lowered, a subtext. I hope you did not come for trouble, and Madison's tilt of the chin, hand brushing a strand of hair, suggested readiness for an unseen challenge, her movement inviting observation yet concealing intention. The sudden ring of a cell phone from the corner startled the crowd slightly, drawing Lucas's glance momentarily away, Madison's eyes following, registering the number on the screen, the unknown observer's subtle smile, a silent confirmation that her plan had potential allies, the room now charged with unspoken questions, and Madison knew the next movement had to be decisive, either reveal an overt challenge or continue threading carefully, each tick of the ornate clock above the mantel marking the narrowing window, and as the music swelled, her gaze fixed on Lucas with unflinching intent, the tension coiling like a spring, she stepped deliberately, a slight brush of her clutch against the marble floor echoing softly, forcing Lucas to shift, the immediate power shift tangible, leaving viewers suspended, wondering how she would capitalize on this first advantage. Watch your step, Lucas Bennett's voice cut through the soft murmur of the gala, the words laced with a subtle challenge as Madison Hart's heel caught briefly on the edge of the marble step, a tiny stumble that drew a flicker of attention from nearby guests, the crystal chandeliers above flickering slightly as if in response, her clutch pressing against her palm, warm and heavy, anchoring her forward momentum. She noticed a folded note tucked under the menu card on the piano bench, the handwriting familiar but the message cryptic. Do not trust appearances tonight, and she tucked it quickly into her gown, the weight of the paper giving her a false certainty that Lucas had a hidden scheme, reinforcing her belief that he controlled the room. Yet as she straightened, the reflection of a man in the mirrored wall caught her attention, sharply dressed and observing, his eyes narrowing, making her second-guess the initial assumption, the faint tinkle of dropped silverware from a nearby table slicing through the air and forcing Lucas to step back, his smile tightening, a subtle acknowledgement of unease. Madison moved deliberately toward the buffet, fingers grazing the polished edge of a silver tray, noticing a wine glass left precariously near the edge, her subtle nudge sending it upright just as Lucas stepped forward, the brief brush of their elbows causing a ripple of tension. His eyes flicking downward for a microsecond, the balance of power shifting in the room. She reached the center of the room, brushing past the velvet curtain, the scent of vanilla and polished oak filling her senses, and Lucas leaned closer, low enough for her to hear. Are you here for attention or trouble? She tilted her head slightly, the gesture controlled, inviting but masking intent, and a server's tray wobbled in the periphery, spilling a single canopy onto the floor, Lucas bending to pick it up. His posture momentarily unsteady, Madison catching a glimpse of a text on his phone screen flashed by a waiter's arm. He is not alone tonight, reinforcing her assumption that Lucas had allies hidden among the crowd, the memory of past betrayals and whispered promises sharpening her resolve, yet the glint of a small pin on the man observing in the corner suggested an unexpected variable, forcing her to recalculate. A soft laugh from another table created a distraction, and Madison shifted her weight, hand brushing the polished railing, feeling the cool metal grounding her, and Lucas's gaze followed the subtle movements, the power dynamics fluctuating, his confidence visibly cracking under the micro-manipulations of her presence. Madison's next step toward the raised platform brought her close to a cluster of guests, their champagne flutes chiming softly, and a misstep by a server caused a chair to scrape loudly across the floor, everyone's attention snapping briefly to the disturbance, Lucas reacting instinctively, head turning, Madison exploiting the moment, sliding slightly to block his view of the mirrored wall, a calculated shadow concealing the observer's subtle nod. She lifted her hand to adjust a necklace, letting her fingers linger on the pendant. Noticing the reflection of Lucas's eyes in the glass doors, the flicker of hesitation, the certainty she held beginning to waver, yet she proceeded, approaching the grand piano, fingertips grazing the ivory keys, drawing a soft note that caught Lucas's attention. His step forward forcing Madison to choose instantly whether to retreat to maintain control or press the advance. She chose to move closer, each step deliberate, the soft shuffle of her gown amplifying the tension, and a sudden clatter from the piano bench as a folded invitation slid to the floor startled both, Lucas bending quickly, Madison pausing just enough to create a micro-pause in his reactions, the room collectively inhaling as the subtle power shifted back and forth. Her eyes met his, holding him in a silent dialogue, Lucas's lips tightening, Madison recognizing the moment of imbalance and realizing her initial belief that he dominated tonight might not be absolute. The new variables, notes, reflections, subtle nods, challenging her assumptions, and as she took a breath, the faint click of her clutch on the marble floor sounded like a ticking clock, forcing an immediate choice. Moving closer would risk exposure of her strategy but allow leverage, retreat would maintain a fragile balance but concede momentum. She stepped forward, brushing past a waiter's arm, and the room responded with a slight ripple, Lucas shifting on his feet, eyes narrowing, Madison's controlled advance creating the first tangible consequence of her decision, leaving a question hanging in the air. Would her next move secure dominance or unravel the fragile balance she had painstakingly built? Step aside, Lucas Bennett said. His tone clipped as a waiter's tray tipped slightly, spilling sparkling water onto the marble floor near Madison Hart's feet, the cool droplets splashing against the heels of her gown, forcing her to adjust her step and inadvertently drawing attention to her approach, and as she moved, the reflection of a gold envelope on the grand piano caught her eye, glinting under the chandelier light, its sudden presence shifting her focus and suggesting a new message from an unknown source. She bent slightly to retrieve it, the paper thick and embossed, and the words "Meet me at the balcony" now scrawled inside. The ink smudged faintly, leading her to assume that Lucas had set another layer of the evening to control her movements, a belief reinforced when she noticed his gaze flick toward the staircase rather than the note in her hand. Stepping carefully across the polished floor, Madison adjusted her clutch, letting the soft scrape of her shoes against the marble mark each deliberate step, and a champagne flute nearly toppled from a nearby table, the waiter catching it just in time, but Lucas's reflexive glance revealed a micro-tension, confirming her suspicion that he felt observed and possibly vulnerable, heightening the stakes. She felt a subtle shift in the air as a flash of movement in the mirrored wall drew her attention, a sharply dressed man watching intently, his eyes narrowing as if to signal caution or hidden information, and the soft murmur of guests obscured the subtle exchange. Madison lifted her hand to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, feeling the slight weight of the envelope pressing against her palm, a tangible signal of expectation, and she heard Lucas's low murmur, "I hope you know what you are doing," laced with subtext. Yet before she could respond, a sudden crash of cutlery from a corner table startled nearby servers, sending a ripple of eyes toward the sound, Lucas's posture stiffening, Madison sensing the micro-power shift and deciding to act. She stepped toward the balcony, brushing past a velvet drape, The breeze from the open French doors carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant fireworks from the city below, the cool air brushing her cheek. As she scanned the edge for any sign of the observer from the corner, a whisper of footsteps behind her made her glance back, Lucas's eyes narrowing, lips tightening, and Madison, interpreting the glance as confirmation that he had arranged surveillance on her movements, forced a small step forward, tilting the envelope so the message was visible, the action compelling Lucas to hesitate, the subtle power shift magnified by the reflection of city lights in the glass panels of the balcony doors, and a faint ping from her phone revealed a message preview. He is not alone tonight, reinforcing her assumption that the situation had additional players. Her next movement now critical, she took a deliberate breath and leaned lightly against the railing, the cool metal grounding her, when the soft click of another heel on marble alerted her to a sudden presence to her side, a gust of wind carrying the faint scent of cologne. Lucas's voice low. "Do you think you can control everything?" Madison's eyes flicked to the envelope once more, the words inside reinforcing a belief that tonight's advantage lay in maneuvering unseen forces, and she stepped slightly to adjust her stance, a subtle movement that shifted the angle of light on her bracelet, catching Lucas's attention and making him instinctively step back, the room's reflection and the city lights creating a momentary distraction. A folded napkin slid from a nearby table to the floor, and Lucas bent to pick it up, his posture momentarily compromised. Madison seized the micro-opportunity, stepping closer to the railing, and a sudden chime from a hidden clock above caused a momentary startle, Lucas's eyes flicking upward, his confidence faltering as her controlled presence dominated the balcony space, the wind rustling the hem of her gown, the soft clink of the envelope against the marble railing, and the whispered call of a distant guest, all combining to heighten the tension. Madison's belief that she could guide the situation solidified yet simultaneously challenged by new variables she had not fully accounted for, leaving her poised at the edge. A decision required immediately. Step fully onto the balcony and reveal intent or remain in partial cover, each choice carrying consequences that Lucas would read and react to. And as the autumn breeze caught her gown, a moment of suspense hung, the power dynamic teetering, a question forming in her mind. Was she leading him into a trap or stepping into one herself? "I do not think you understand," Madison Hart whispered under her breath as she stepped closer to the balcony railing, the cool metal pressing into her fingertips, the autumn wind tugging slightly at her gown, causing it to ripple against her legs, and she noticed a small envelope wedged between the balusters, the edges catching the golden light. The words "check the third-floor study" faintly visible, prompting an immediate calculation in her mind that Lucas Bennett had anticipated her every move, reinforcing a false assumption that he controlled the next steps. Her eyes scanning the room below for any sign of surveillance as the soft clink of a dropped fork echoed from the dining area, Lucas's head snapping briefly toward the sound, a micro-expression of concern flashing across his face. She pocketed the envelope and took a measured step back from the railing, catching the shimmer of a reflection in the glass doors behind her, a sharply dressed figure appearing for a split second, suggesting a possible ally, and she decided to move toward the staircase, the polished wood underfoot reflecting the chandelier light, each step deliberate, her clutch brushing against her thigh, and she felt the faint vibration of a phone alert in her hand, a message from an unknown number. He is watching from the shadows, causing her to adjust her trajectory, assuming the third-floor study held the key to Lucas's intentions, the belief so strong she almost did not notice a sudden shift in the crowd as a group of guests turned toward a loud crash from the grand piano area. The music abruptly halting, Lucas taking a half-step back, eyes narrowing, and Madison seized the opportunity, stepping faster toward the stairs, her heels clicking sharply against the marble, a subtle command of attention rippling through the room. As she reached the staircase, a folded note slipped from the railing and drifted to the floor near Lucas, the faint smell of cologne lingering, causing her to assume it was left deliberately, a sign that he knew she was observing. She bent to retrieve it, revealing a single line. "Do not trust your eyes," the message amplifying the sense of a trap, her steps quickening, fingers grazing the polished banister, and she caught movement in the mirrored wall, a shadow flitting across the corner of her vision, sparking suspicion that an additional observer had arrived. Unnoticed, the soft scrape of a shoe against the marble marking each second as tension mounted. A waiter stumbled slightly with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, the clatter of glass drawing Lucas's attention briefly, his smile tightening, Madison adjusting the angle of her clutch to block his line of sight while keeping the envelope secure. the reflection in the mirror suggesting the observer was moving closer, and she instinctively chose to continue up the staircase despite the risk, each step increasing exposure, the chandelier light flickering off crystal prisms, catching her bracelet in flashes that made Lucas instinctively glance up, the subtle shift reinforcing her belief that she was controlling the pace. Yet a sudden whistle from the kitchen, a sharp sound cutting across the ballroom, startled a nearby guest, causing a ripple of heads turning and Lucas shifting weight defensively, the room's dynamics shifting. Madison, realizing the next step demanded a calculated risk. Reaching the third-floor landing, she paused, hand lightly on the railing, noting the polished study door ahead, its brass handle reflecting the low light, and a soft creak behind her signaled Lucas's approach, his voice low. "Madison, you think you can uncover what I have hidden?" She lifted her head slightly, tilting the envelope toward the door, a micro gesture forcing him to hesitate, the wind from an open window tugging at her gown, and she felt the sudden pressure of decision. Advance into the study now and risk confrontation or retreat to gather more information. Choosing to push forward, Madison stepped closer to the door, the soft click of her heels against the wooden floor echoing like a countdown, and, as her fingers grazed the handle, the faint glint of a reflection revealed another figure peering from the corner, raising the question. Had Lucas anticipated even this move, leaving her on the brink of exposure while her assumptions about the study's secrets teetered, creating a tense moment charged with unknown variables and consequences waiting to unfold? "Do not move," Lucas Bennett's voice cut sharply as Madison Hart's hand lingered on the brass handle of the study door, the metal cold under her fingers, the soft click of her heels against the polished wood floor echoing like a warning, and she noticed a faint reflection of movement in the glass panel beside the door, a sharply dressed figure retreating, causing her to assume the study was unguarded, a belief reinforced when she peeked through the narrow crack and saw the room seemingly empty. Except for a single laptop on the mahogany desk, its screen displaying a paused slideshow, yet as she stepped forward, the faint scuff of shoes behind her indicated Lucas had followed. Each step her heels made pressing urgency against her chest. She decided to enter the study despite the risk, brushing her gown against the doorframe, and immediately a folded note slipped from the laptop, landing near her feet. Reading "Not everything is where it seems," shaking her assumption that she was safe. She bent to pick it up, feeling the paper's weight in her palm, when the soft creak of the staircase above warned her of Lucas's approach, his eyes narrowing as he stopped in the doorway, voice low. "Do you really think you can read my game?" Madison lifted her head, tilting the note slightly, forcing him to hesitate, the chandelier light catching the edge of her bracelet glinting sharply. She moved toward the laptop, adjusting its angle, noticing an unfamiliar USB drive clipped to the side, a detail Lucas did not account for, and as she reached for it, the laptop unexpectedly emitted a soft chime, the screen changing to a live feed of the ballroom, Lucas stepping closer, her micro miscalculation causing her to realize she had underestimated his preparation, a surge of panic pressing her to make an immediate choice. Grab the drive and risk exposure or retreat and lose momentum. She reached for the drive, her fingertips brushing the cool metal, and as she pulled it free, the laptop screen flickered, showing Lucas's glance, a micro shift in power as he moved quickly to close the distance, and the soft scrape of her clutch against the desk punctuated the tension. A gust from the open window made papers flutter, revealing a small photograph clipped beneath the laptop, an image of Madison and Lucas years ago at a charity event. Her own expression caught mid-laughter, causing a fleeting doubt that perhaps she had been naive in assuming the study contained only neutral information. Her belief that she controlled the room now challenged, and she quickly slid the photograph aside to maintain composure, Lucas's shadow stretching across the desk as he leaned closer, voice low. "Do you think this ends here?" Madison's eyes flicked to the window, the city lights reflecting off the glass, her pulse quickening as she decided to tuck the USB into her gown, the consequence immediate, the laptop locking with a soft click, denying further access, a failure she had not anticipated, Lucas's grin tightening as he stepped back slightly, the subtle power shift evident. She pivoted on her heel, scanning the room for escape or advantage, the soft tap of a foot against the wooden floor, a slight breeze from the open window fluttering papers across the desk, Lucas's hand reaching toward a drawer, Madison realizing she had triggered an unintended alarm of attention. The next step critical, she had to decide instantly whether to confront him verbally or move to the window, and as she moved toward the ledge, a faint light blinked on the USB, revealing an unknown folder labeled Tonight, creating an entirely new variable, her assumptions about control crumbling as she balanced the weight of the gown against the urgency of escape, the soft echo of Lucas's footsteps following, and Madison paused, fingers on the edge of the sill, realizing the stakes had escalated beyond a single room, leaving her poised on the brink of exposure with the first real glimpse of information that could change everything. "You are not alone," Madison Hart whispered sharply as her fingers hovered over the USB drive, the sudden realization making the polished wood of the study desk feel colder beneath her palm, and she noticed the faint reflection of a man entering through the partially open door, a subtle shift of movement that contradicted her previous assumption that Lucas controlled the space entirely, the soft click of her heels on the floorboards echoing as she pivoted, clutch pressed to her chest, the edge of her bracelet catching the light from the chandelier above. She glanced back at the laptop where a new folder had appeared, the label Tonight's Guests glowing faintly, forcing her to reassess her understanding of the surveillance, the soft rustle of papers from the open window catching her attention, a document sliding toward the edge, nearly falling, her fingers snapping forward to catch it, revealing a seating chart that suggested Lucas had anticipated her movements more intricately than she realized. Yet another reflection on the glass panel showed a shadow moving in the corridor, an unknown figure whose presence added immediate risk. Madison reached for the photograph clipped beneath the laptop, lifting it to inspect the faint annotation on the back, confirm identity before action, the note implying a hidden layer to Lucas's plan, causing a quick reevaluation of her earlier assumption that the study held neutral information, and the sudden creak of a floorboard behind her startled her, Lucas's voice low. "Madison, you think you can uncover what is hidden?" She tilted her head, letting the envelope slip slightly from her gown, the movement drawing his eyes downward and creating a micro-power shift, and in that fraction of a second she moved to the side, knocking over a small decorative vase, its soft clatter distracting him briefly, allowing her to reposition the laptop to block part of the live feed. As she adjusted, a faint ping on her phone revealed a message preview. "They are approaching the study," reinforcing the immediacy of action, and she realized the photograph's annotation was likely planted to manipulate her. Yet the visual details suggested she could still gain advantage if she acted quickly. Madison leaned toward the window, tracing her fingers over the cool brass latch, the wind catching the hem of her gown, and Lucas shifted, his glance flicking to the city lights outside, a pause that revealed just enough hesitation for her to consider escape or continued engagement, the faint shuffle of paper underfoot signaling movement from the corridor. She decided to act, tugging the USB from her gown and sliding it into the inside pocket of her jacket, the motion creating a soft brush against the laptop edge, its screen flickering with a new notification, a partial video feed of the ballroom, the unexpected preview suggesting Lucas had more eyes watching than she anticipated, forcing her to recognize that her initial power advantage might be compromised. Yet she continued forward, pressing toward the partially open door, each step increasing exposure, her heels scraping lightly against the floor, the air thick with tension and the distant hum of the gala below echoing up the stairwell. Lucas stepping forward, voice steady but laced with subtle warning. "Do you realize what you just triggered?" Madison's hand brushed a small stack of papers, one sliding toward the floor, the soft flutter creating a distraction and giving her just enough margin to enter the hallway. Yet as she crossed the threshold, the faint metallic glint of a security badge pinned on a coat hook caught her eye, an element she had not noticed before, shifting her belief about who might be aligned with Lucas, and the soft click of a distant door closing echoed. A new variable entering the scene. Madison froze, realizing that the next move would determine whether she could maintain control or if she would be forced into a reactive stance, leaving her poised in the hallway with a sudden surge of uncertainty, and the question of who else was present escalating the stakes dramatically. "Stay right there." Alexander Drake's calm voice cut through the dim hallway, Madison heart spinning slightly, clutch tightening against her chest, the soft brush of her gown against the polished wood floor marking every tenth second, the faint click of the window latch from earlier still vibrating in the autumn breeze, and she noticed the soft glow of the city lights reflecting off his cufflinks, subtle yet deliberate, an unspoken assurance beneath the tension. Her eyes flicking toward Lucas Bennett, whose shadow stretched across the study doorway, lips pressing into a thin line as he assessed the situation, the faint whir of a distant ceiling fan mixing with the low hum of the ballroom below. Madison shifted, tilting the envelope in her hand to catch the low light, revealing a portion of writing she had not noticed before. Do not underestimate her calm, and a small key clipped to the side of the laptop, glinting in the chandelier glow, suggested a hidden mechanism she had overlooked, forcing her to reconsider the immediate path forward, her heels scraping softly against the wooden floor as she stepped closer to the center of the hallway, the motion deliberate, designed to draw Lucas's attention while keeping control of the USB in her pocket. A soft exhale from Alexander, barely audible, marked his awareness of her movement, and he stepped slightly to the side, the edge of his jacket brushing the railing, subtle but protective, shifting power without overt interference. Madison's gaze sweeping past him to the far corner where a mirrored panel reflected a shadow she had not accounted for. Movement fast, deliberate, hinting at an additional observer. The room suddenly filled with soft clicks as someone adjusted a camera, forcing her to decide immediately whether to confront or evade. She moved to the left, brushing against the cool brass of the railing, fingers grazing the edge of the envelope, the soft slip of paper revealing a partially obscured note. The plan is already in motion, confirming part of her earlier assumptions, yet the sudden blink of the laptop screen caught her off guard, showing Lucas watching her through another angle, creating doubt about her perceived advantage. Madison adjusted stance, inhaling the faint scent of vanilla from the open window, tilting her head slightly toward Alexander, whose presence offered silent support, her decision immediate. Step fully into the hallway and confront Lucas or retreat and lose momentum. She chose forward movement, the soft click of her heels marking intent, and Lucas's narrowed eyes followed, the subtle shift of weight on his heels betraying a flicker of uncertainty. A decorative vase teetered on the edge of a nearby console, the gentle nudge from Madison's elbow sending it to wobble without toppling, the soft clatter drawing Lucas's gaze downward, her micro-action creating a temporary diversion, Alexander stepping closer to shadow her movement without touching. Silent indicator of trust and support. Madison reached the midpoint of the hallway, the soft hum of the distant chandelier echoing off the walls. Lucas exhaled sharply, his hand brushing against the doorframe, momentarily caught between aggression and hesitation. Madison sliding the envelope into her jacket, soft rustle of fabric, the subtle movement signaling finality of her decision, and she stepped to the edge of the balcony door, the cold metal of the latch under her fingers, wind catching the hem of her gown as Lucas shifted. A faint shuffle of paper underfoot and the sudden click of the door behind him created a jolt of tension. Madison, noticing a faint glint from a folded note on the ledge, looked closer, her pulse quickening as the possibility of yet another layer emerged. Alexander's presence beside her steadying, offering subtle guidance without intrusion. Madison's eyes fixed on Lucas, decision made to advance with full awareness of the risk, and the soft sweep of her gown against the floor punctuated the moment, leaving the scene charged with unspoken power, layered alliances, and the sudden question of who else was truly observing, poised to explode the next movement. It ends here, Madison Hart said sharply as she stepped fully onto the balcony, the cool metal railing pressing against her palms, the city lights flickering across her gown in jagged patterns. Lucas Bennett standing a few paces back, shadowed by the soft glow from the open French doors, lips pressed in a thin line, the faint click of Alexander Drake's cufflink catching her eye, signaling calm authority without intervention. Madison's heels scraping softly against the marble as she advanced toward Lucas, the wind catching a loose strand of hair and brushing it across her cheek, the subtle motion highlighting her controlled presence. She lifted the envelope from her jacket, letting the corner catch the light, revealing the first clear detail of the evening. A signed document confirming Lucas's internal mismanagement, the paper weight heavy and precise, prompting him to shift slightly, eyes narrowing, and she stepped closer, brushing the railing, fingertips grazing cool metal. Lucas's hand twitching toward the doorframe, yet Alexander's calm stance behind Madison offered an unspoken validation of her position, a subtle power shift. The wind fluttered a curtain, revealing a reflection in the mirrored panel of the ballroom below, showing Lucas's colleagues observing silently. Madison's gaze swept across the cityscape behind them, the faint hum of distant traffic and fireworks punctuating the tension, a soft ping on her phone displaying an email confirming her authority to intervene in the company's decisions, two details now aligning, giving her a concrete edge. Lucas exhaled sharply, voice low. "I see you understand more than I expected." And Madison tilted her head, eyes unwavering, stepping so that the glow of the city lights highlighted the glint of her bracelet, her subtle movement forcing him to pause, the power balance tilting. She reached the edge of the balcony, the cold metal railing grounding her, and a folded note fell from the envelope, fluttering in the wind, to the floor, displaying a partial signature of a board member, the revelation clarifying part of the story, but also exposing that she had underestimated how closely Lucas had coordinated allies. Attention. Spike as she realized her next move had to be decisive. She inhaled, sliding the USB from her pocket, fingers brushing the polished wood, Lucas stepping toward her, voice tight. Do you think this changes anything? Madison shifted, the soft click of her heels punctuating each heartbeat, and she chose to hold the USB aloft briefly, letting the light catch its edge, the power momentarily in her hands, Lucas stepping back slightly, a micro-surrender in posture. She pivoted, scanning the reflection in the glass, Alexander's presence steadying, and Madison moved to step fully into the open space, letting the evening breeze catch her gown, the wind lifting it subtly. Lucas's